The rain battered the windshield of my rig with a ferocity that felt personal, as if the sky itself wanted to wash me off the asphalt. It was one of those nights where the darkness wasn't just an absence of light, but a physical weight, pressing down on the high beams that struggled to cut a path through the storm. I was hauling lumber down Highway 18, a stretch of road in rural North Carolina that I had driven 100 times before, but never like this. The power was out across the county, turning farmhouses into jagged silhouettes against the occasional flash of lightning. There were no street lamps, no porch lights, just the relentless gray curtain of rain and the twin cones of my headlights revealing the slick, black ribbon of the road. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The radio had long since dissolved into static, leaving me alone with the drone of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the wipers. I was tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that made the edges of my vision blur, but I could not stop. The schedule was tight, and the weather was an excuse my dispatcher would not accept. I shifted gears, the truck groaning in protest as we climbed a shallow incline. The woods on either side of the highway were thick, a tangled wall of pine and kudzu that seemed to line in, hungry and watching. That was when I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of fatigue and the hypnotic movement of the wipers. A pale shape on the right shoulder of the road, walking south. I blinked, expecting it to vanish like the phantom deer that sometimes darted across my peripheral vision, but it did not vanish. As I drew closer, the shape resolved into a figure. It was small, too small to be an adult. It was a child. Disbelief washed over me, cold and sharp. I lifted my foot off the accelerator, the engine braking with a low growl. The figure was walking steadily, head down against the driving rain. It was a young girl dressed in white. She wore a long-sleeved shirt and white pants that clung to her small frame, soaked through. Her hair was pulled back in pigtails that dripped water. She carried a book bag, clutching it tight to her chest as if it contained the only warmth left in the world. I could not understand what I was seeing. It was the middle of the night, a time when reasonable people were safe in their beds, yet here was a child, no older than 9 or 10, walking alone on a desolate highway in a freezing storm. The wind whipped her clothes, but she did not stagger. She marched with a terrifying determination. I checked my mirrors purely out of habit. The road behind me was empty, a gaping maw of darkness. I was the only witness to this impossibility. I engaged the air brakes, the hiss loud in the cabin, and began to slow down. I could not just drive past. No human being with a shred of conscience could leave a child out here. I pulled the rig onto the narrow shoulder, the tires crunching on wet gravel. The truck shuddered as it came to a halt. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The wind hit me instantly, stealing the breath from my lungs and soaking my shirt in seconds. I jumped down from the cab, my boots sinking into the mud. "Hey," I called out, my voice was swallowed by the gale. I tried again, louder, "I need you to stop." The girl did not stop, she did not even turn around. She kept walking, her pace unhurried, as if she existed in a different reality where I was nothing more than a ghost. I jogged to catch up, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the rain to illuminate her small, retreating back. "Please," I said, nearing her, "you cannot be out here. It is not safe." She stopped then. She stood perfectly still on the edge of the asphalt. Slowly, she turned her head. I braced myself for tears, for the look of a terrified lost child. But when the light hit her face, there was no fear. Her eyes were dark and unreadable, staring through me rather than at me. She looked calm, eerily so. She looked at the woods to her right, a dense thicket of shadows and brambles. Then, without a word, she stepped off the road. I watched in horror as she descended the embankment, slipping into the ravine that lined the highway. The undergrowth swallowed her white form almost instantly. "Wait," I yelled, scrambling to the edge of the road. The beam of my flashlight danced frantically over the wet leaves and tree trunks. I could see the sway of branches where she had passed, but she was moving fast, unnaturally fast for a child in such terrain. I hesitated. The woods were uninviting, hostile territory in this weather, but the image of that girl, soaked and alone, pushed me forward. I slid down the embankment, mud slicking the knees of my jeans, and pushed into the tree line. The silence of the woods was heavy, a damp blanket that muffled the roar of the storm on the highway. Here, the rain fell in heavy, rhythmic drops from the canopy. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying pine needles. I swept my light back and forth. "Little girl," I called out, keeping my voice level, "I am not going to hurt you. I just want to help." There was no answer, just the sound of the wind groaning in the treetops. I pushed deeper, following the faint trail of disturbed vegetation. A candy wrapper lay on a patch of moss, bright red against the green. I knelt to examine it. It was dry on the underside. She had just dropped it. She was close. I stood up and swung the light forward. About 50 yards ahead, I saw a structure. It was an old shed, perhaps a storage outbuilding for a farm long since abandoned. The wood was gray and rotting, the tin roof rusted through. It sat in a small clearing, surrounded by encroaching vines. The door hung slightly ajar. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain crawled up my spine. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn back, to return to the safety of my truck and radio the police. But I was already here. I took a step toward the shed. Then I heard it, not the girl, not the wind. It was the sound of an engine. It was low and throaty, coming from a dirt access road that I had not noticed, a narrow track that cut through the woods to the shed. I doused my flashlight instantly, plunging myself into absolute darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crouched behind the thick trunk of an oak tree, pressing my face against the rough bark. Twin beams of light cut through the trees, blindingly bright. A car was rolling slowly down the track. It was an older model, dark green, maybe a Lincoln or a Thunderbird. The headlights swept over the shed, illuminating the rotting wood. The car came to a stop just feet from the door. I held my breath. The rain dripped from my nose, cold and distracting, but I did not dare wipe it away. The driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy raincoat and a hat that obscured his features. He did not use a flashlight. He moved with a familiarity that suggested he had been here before. He walked to the trunk of the car and opened it. From my vantage point, I could only see his silhouette against the trunk light. He reached inside and pulled out something long and wrapped in plastic. He set it on the ground. Then he turned and looked directly at the woods. He looked directly at the tree where I was hiding. I froze. I knew I was invisible in the dark, hidden by the storm in the distance, but the weight of his gaze felt physical. He stood there for a long moment, motionless, a statue in the rain. Then he turned back to the shed. I heard a small voice then. It was faint, barely a whisper over the rain. "Mommy, it came from the shed." The man stiffened. He slammed the trunk shut. He walked towards the shed door, his movements sudden and aggressive. I knew then that I was witnessing something evil. This was not a rescue. This was not a coincidence. This was the end of something terrible. Panic, raw and primal, seized me. I wanted to run, to charge him, to do something. But fear is a paralyzing agent. I watched as he entered the shed. I heard the sound of movement inside, scuffling footsteps on dry wood. Then silence. I waited, seconds stretched into minutes. The rain intensified, turning into a deluge. I was shaking so hard I thought my teeth would shatter. The man emerged from the shed. He was alone. He walked back to the car, got in, and started the engine. The headlights swept the clearing again as he reversed, turning the car around. He drove back up the dirt track, the red taillights fading into the gloom until they were gone. I was alone again. I forced my legs to move. I stumbled toward the shed, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I pushed the door open. The beam cut through the dusty air. The shed was empty. There was debris on the floor, old newspapers, broken tools, a rusted tractor part, but there was no girl. There was no sign that anyone had been there, except for a single object resting on an overturned crate in the center of the room. It was a hair bow, white with small pink bears. It was dry. I spun around, sweeping the light into the corners, desperate to find a trapdoor, a hidden exit, anything. There was nothing. The walls were solid, the floor was dirt. She was gone. I ran back through the woods, heedless of the brambles tearing at my clothes and the roots trying to trip me. I scrambled up the embankment, slipping and sliding in the mud until I hit the pavement of Highway 18. My truck was there, idling, a beacon of safety in a world gone wrong. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, staring out at the empty road where I had seen her walking. The image of those pigtails, that determined walk, burned in my mind. I drove to the next town. I found a payphone at a gas station that still had power. I called the police. I told them everything. I told them about the girl in white. I told them about the green car. I told them about the shed. They listened, they took notes, they searched the woods, they found the shed, they found the candy wrappers, they found the bow, but they never found her. Years have passed since that night. I still drive a truck, but I never take Highway 18 after dark. I stick to the interstates where the lights are bright and there are always other cars around. But sometimes, when the rain is hard and the night is deep, I look into the rearview mirror and I expect to see her sitting in the sleeper berth behind me. I expect to see her staring at me with those calm, dark eyes, asking me why I hid behind the tree, asking me why I let him drive away. I read the papers, I know her name now, I know her parents are still looking, I know the community still holds vigils, they call her the degree girl, they put her picture on billboards. But I know the truth, I know that the highway is not just a road, it is a river, and sometimes things fall in and are swept away to places where we cannot follow. I know that monsters drive green cars and look like anyone else. And I know that I am a coward. The face of the man in the rain haunts me more than the ghost of the girl, because I realize something later, something that wakes me up in a cold sweat. When he looked at the woods, he wasn't looking for me. He was looking at the spot where I had parked my truck on the shoulder. He knew someone had stopped. He knew someone was watching. He let me live. And every time it rains, I wonder if he will ever change his mind. I wonder if one night, on a lonely stretch of blacktop, I will see those headlights in my mirror again. I wonder if the green car is still out there, prowling the storm, looking for the ones who walk alone. I check my locks, I turn up the radio, I drive, but I never look at the shoulder of the road, I never look into the woods. Because I know what is waiting there. The heat of the late afternoon hung heavy over Asheville, a humid blanket that made the air in the station feel stale despite the rattling efforts of the air conditioner. I sat at my desk, the wood grain worn smooth by decades of elbows and spilled coffee, staring at the file that had just landed in my tray. It was thin, deceptively so for something that felt this heavy. A missing person report, 18 years old, Zeb Quinn. In this line of work, you learn to categorize disappearances quickly. There are the runaways, the kids who pack a bag and head for the coast because their parents took the car keys. There are the misunderstandings, the boyfriends who stay out too late and forget to call. And then there are the others, the ones that raise the hair on the back of your neck before you even read the first witness statement. This was one of the others. I grabbed my jacket and keys. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line as I drove out to the boy's house, casting long, bruised shadows across the winding roads of North Carolina. I needed to speak to the mother. I needed to see the room he had left behind. The house was quiet, filled with that suffocating silence that only tragedy brings. Denise Quinn sat on the edge of her sofa, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were the color of old bone. She told me about Zeb. He was a good kid, responsible. He worked at Walmart. He was taking classes. He wouldn't just leave. Everyone says that, but as I walked through his room, looking at the posters on the wall and the bed that had been slept in the night before, I felt it too. The stillness of interrupted life, a pair of contact lenses sitting in their case, a uniform shirt on a hanger. These were not the artifacts of a departure. They were the leftovers of an abduction. I drove to the Walmart where he worked. It was full dark now, the parking lot bathed in the sickly sodium glow of the street lamps. I met with the friend who had seen him last, Robert. He was standing by his car, smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright and then fading in the gloom. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He told me a story that made no sense. He said they had finished their shift for the evening. They were planning to drive out to look at a car Zeb was thinking of buying, a Mitsubishi Eclipse. Zeb was driving his Mazda Protege. Robert was following in his truck. They were heading down the highway, just two teenagers on a Tuesday night. Then came the page. Robert told me Zeb's pager went off, a single beep that cut through the noise of the road. Zeb slowed down, pulling over to use a payphone at a gas station. Robert watched from his truck. He saw Zeb pick up the receiver. He saw Zeb dial. And then he saw the change. Robert described it with a shudder. He said Zeb instantly became frantic. He was slamming his hand against the wall of the booth. He hung up the phone with a violence that rattled the plastic casing. When he got back into his car, he nearly rear-ended Robert's truck in his haste to leave. I asked Robert what Zeb had said. He said Zeb told him he couldn't go look at the car anymore. He said something had come up, something bad. He mentioned a name, or maybe it was a person he needed to return the page to. A woman, an aunt maybe, but Zeb didn't have an aunt by that name. Then he was gone. He turned his car around and sped off into the night, taillights dissolving into the darkness. That was the last time Robert saw him. I thanked Robert and watched him drive away. I stood in the parking lot for a long time, listening to the distant hum of traffic on Long Shoals Road. The story felt wrong. It was too jagged, full of sharp edges that didn't fit together. A frantic page, a mysterious woman, a sudden departure. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie, the kind teenagers make up to cover for something else. But Zeb was gone. The days that followed were a blur of dead ends and cold lights. We traced the page. It had come from the home of a woman Zeb knew, a girl he had a crush on, but she denied sending it. She said she was at dinner with her aunt. We checked her alibi. It held up, so who was in her house? Who picked up her phone and dialed Zeb's pager number? The mystery deepened like a rot spreading under the floorboards. 2 days later, the phone in the station rang. It was a woman with a voice like sandpaper. She claimed to be Zeb's aunt. She said Zeb was fine. She said he had gone camping for a few days to clear his head. She said not to worry. I remember holding the receiver away from my ear, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. We traced the call. It didn't come from a campsite. It didn't come from a payphone. It came from the Volvo plant where Robert worked. When we questioned him, he admitted making the call. He said Zeb had asked him to. He said Zeb had called him, begged him to buy more time, to tell his mom he was okay so she wouldn't worry. Why would a missing boy ask his friend to impersonate his aunt? Why would he not just call his mother himself? The pieces were not just not fitting, they were from different puzzles entirely. Then came the discovery. It was 2 weeks after the disappearance. A call came in from a restaurant manager over by the Little Pig's barbecue. He said there was a car in the back lot that had been sitting there for days, a Mazda. I felt a cold stone drop into my stomach. I knew before I even saw the plate number. I arrived at the scene in the early afternoon. The sky was a flat, featureless gray, promising rain that hadn't yet fallen. The car was parked oddly, straddling the lines as if abandoned in a hurry. It was Zeb's Mazda. I put on my gloves and approached the vehicle. The windows were rolled up. The car was locked. I peered through the driver's side glass. My breath caught in my throat. On the back seat, sitting upright and staring forward with bright, unblinking eyes, was a puppy. A black Labrador mix, no more than 3 months old. It was alive. It was shivering, thin, but alive. I signaled for the kit to unlock the door. The puppy whimpered as the lock clicked. We got the animal out, gave it water from a canteen. It drank greedily, water spilling onto the asphalt. Who leaves a puppy in a locked car for days? But the puppy was not the only thing in the car. I leaned back in. On the rear windshield, drawn in something thick and red, were a pair of lips, a perfect, garish kiss mark, and next to it an exclamation point. It looked like lipstick, it looked like a taunt. I sat in the driver's seat, trying to get a feel for the last person who had been here. The seat was pushed back. Zeb was not a tall boy. This seat was adjusted for someone bigger. The key was in the ignition. It was turned to the auxiliary position, just enough to keep the radio on, but the battery was long dead. But it was the headlights that froze my blood. They had been manually turned on, but the switch, whoever had done it had twisted the knob with such force that the plastic had cracked. It wasn't just turned on, it was wrenched, as if someone had been desperate for light in a place of absolute, consuming darkness, or as if they were trying to signal something. I searched the rest of the car. There was a hotel key card in the pocket of a jacket draped over the passenger seat. There were drink bottles, but no sign of a struggle, no blood, no Zeb. The lipstick on the window was the detail that kept me awake that night. I sat in my living room, the television muttering low in the corner, staring at the photos from the scene. The lips were grotesque in their cheerfulness. They smiled down at where the puppy had sat, starving in the heat. It was a staging, I knew it in my gut. This wasn't a crime scene, it was a theater set. Someone had placed the puppy there, someone had drawn those lips, someone had wiped the steering wheel clean but left the keys. They were playing with us. I went back to Robert, I had to. He was the anchor, the only thing tethering Zeb to the known world. I sat across from him in the interrogation room. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and stale sweat. I showed him the picture of the lips. I watched his eyes. They didn't widen, they didn't flinch. They just slid away, focusing on a spot on the wall behind me. He told the story again, the page, the phone call, the erratic driving. It was a script, rehearsed and polished until the truth was buried under layers of repetition. I asked him about the injury on his head. I had noticed it the first night, a bandage on his scalp. He had told me it was from a farm accident. Now looking at him, I wondered. I wondered about the dark roads out past the city limits. I wondered about the deep woods where the cell service died and the only light came from the moon. I wondered what kind of accident leaves a boy looking like he's seen a ghost. Was Zeb dead? I knew the answer, even if I couldn't prove it. You don't leave your car, your life, and a helpless animal behind unless you aren't coming back. The weeks turned into months. The leads dried up like leaves in winter. The puppy was adopted by one of the officers. The car was impounded, a rusting monument to a boy who vanished into thin air. But I couldn't let it go. I found myself driving past the spot where the car was found. I found myself driving the route Robert claimed they took. One night late, I stopped at the gas station where Zeb had supposedly made that call. The payphone was still there, a metal box on a pole, scarred by graffiti and time. I parked my car where Zeb would have parked. I stood in the booth. I looked out at the road. It was empty. The silence was absolute. I picked up the receiver. There was no dial tone, just the dead weight of plastic in my hand. I imagined Zeb standing here, the panic Robert described, the frantic need to leave. What if there was no page? What if the only call that night was the one that led him to his death? A car drove past, its headlights sweeping over me, blinding in the darkness. I flinched, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a second, I saw the lipstick lips floating in the afterimage, a red grin in the dark. I got back in my car. I locked the doors. The investigation officially went cold. Years passed, people moved on, but the file stayed on my desk, buried under newer tragedies but never forgotten. I still see Denise Quinn at the grocery store sometimes. She looks older, smaller, as if the grief is slowly eroding her from the inside out. We nod to each other. There is nothing left to say. I retired last year. I turned in my badge and my gun, but I didn't turn in the memories. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I check my rearview mirror. I check the back seat. I look for a pair of eyes reflecting the streetlights. I listen for the beep of a pager that doesn't exist anymore. And I think about the headlights on that Mazda, the switch broken by a desperate hand. What did Zeb see in those final moments? Did he see the face of a friend turned stranger? Did he see the woods closing in? Or did he see something worse? The lipstick lips, the living puppy, the staged car. It was all a game played by someone who knew how to hide in plain sight. I look at the shadows on the side of the road, and I wonder if Zeb is out there, buried beneath the earth we drive over every day. I wonder if he's waiting for us to figure out the punchline to the joke scrawled in red on his rear window. But mostly I wonder about the person who drew it, the person who walked away from that car, leaving a puppy to die and a mystery to rot. He is still out there. He might be the man bagging your groceries. He might be the neighbor mowing his lawn. He might be the friend driving behind you on a dark highway, flashing his lights, signaling you to pull over. And that is the part that keeps the gun in my nightstand drawer loaded and ready, because the road is long and the night is deep, and we never really know who is following us home. The mist in Whatcom County doesn't just obscure your vision, it swallows the world whole. It clings to the Douglas firs like wet cotton, dampening sound and turning the landscape into a grayscale photograph where depth perception is a lie and every shadow suggests movement. I was out on the access roads near Canyon Creek, miles from the nearest paved highway, checking the perimeter of a logging claim that hadn't been active since the late 90s. The silence here is heavy, aggressive even. It presses against your eardrums, broken only by the drip of condensation falling from the canopy to the fern-choked floor. I was driving my truck slowly, the tires crunching over gravel and pine needles. The air smelled of ozone and wet earth, the kind of scent that permeates your clothes and stays there for days. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just doing the rounds, making sure the washout from the last storm hadn't taken out the road. Then I saw it. It was subtle, a breakage in the pattern of the forest. A swathe of devil's club and berry bushes had been flattened, not by wind or animal, but by something heavy and fast. The path of destruction led off the edge of the road, disappearing over the steep embankment that dropped down toward the roaring creek below. I stopped the truck and killed the engine. The silence rushed back in. I walked to the edge of the drop-off and looked down. Through the tangle of branches and fog, 40 feet down, lay a white shape. It was a vehicle, a Jeep Cherokee. It lay on its side, wedged against a cluster of ancient cedars that had stopped its slide into the river. I shouted down, no answer, just the rush of the water over the rocks. I grabbed my radio to call it in, but the static was a solid wall of white noise. I was in a dead zone, a pocket of the mountains where signals went to die. I knew the protocol: assess the situation, check for survivors, then go for help. I began the descent. The slope was treacherous, a slurry of mud and loose shale hidden under the slick vegetation. I grabbed onto roots and saplings to slow my slide. As I got closer, the details of the wreck sharpened. The Jeep was a mess. The roof was caved in on one side, metal groaning under the torture of the impact. The white paint was scarred with streaks of brown mud and green sap. I reached the bottom of the slope, my boots sinking into the soft soil near the creek bed. I circled the vehicle carefully. The silence here was different. It felt watchful. Front windshield was gone, shattered, but the side windows, that was strange. They weren't just broken out. Someone had taken blankets and clothes, jeans, flannels, t-shirts, and jammed them into the window frames from the inside. It blocked the view into the cabin. It looked like a makeshift curtain or a blind. Why would a crash victim blind themselves to the outside world? I moved to the front. The hood was slightly buckled. I shone my flashlight into the cabin. "Hello," I called out. The interior was a chaotic nest of personal belongings. It looked less like a car crash and more like an exploded bedroom. Clothes were everywhere. Books were scattered across the dashboard and the seats. I recognized one of the covers immediately. The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. Beside it, Into the Wild asterisk. The irony hit me like a physical blow. Someone had come out here chasing a romantic idea of solitude and had found the brutal reality of it instead. There was no body in the driver's seat, no body in the passenger seat. I scrambled up onto the side of the Jeep to look through the open windshield. The keys were not in the ignition. I scanned the floorboards. Nothing. No blood. No obvious signs of major trauma inside the cabin, which was miraculous given the state of the exterior. But then I saw the money. A pair of pants lay draped over the steering column. A pocket was turned out and a wad of cash was spilling onto the floor mat. $20 bills, a lot of them. Who leaves a crash site and leaves the cash? And there was something else, a cat carrier. It was wedged in the back, the door hanging open. Next to it, spilled across the rear cargo area, were mounds of dry cat food. It crunched under my hand as I leaned in. No cat. I backed out of the wreck, wiping mud from my gloves. I stood there, listening. If she, I assumed it was a she from the clothes, had been thrown from the vehicle, she could be anywhere in the brush. I began a grid search of the immediate area. I pushed through waist-high ferns, checking the hollows of trees and the space beneath the undergrowth. I found nothing, no footprints leading away, no broken branches indicating a person scrambling up the slope. It was as if the earth had swallowed the driver whole the moment the car stopped moving. I went back to the Jeep. Something about it bothered me. It sat there like a tomb. I decided to check the engine. It was a habit from my mechanic days. The state of the engine could tell you if the car was running when it went over. I popped the hood. It was stiff, the metal twisted, but I wrenched it up. And that was when the cold feeling started in my gut and spread to my fingertips. The starter relay wire had been cut. It wasn't torn, it wasn't snapped by the impact. The heavy plastic insulation had been sliced clean through, the copper wire severed with a sharp edge, a knife. I stared at that cut wire. A car doesn't go off a cliff and cut its own starter wire. Someone had done this. Someone had disabled the car to ensure it wouldn't start. Was it before the crash or after? If it was before, she was sabotaged. If it was after. I let the hood slam shut. The sound echoed through the canyon, disturbingly loud. I looked up at the road high above me. From down here, it was invisible. I was completely alone in a ravine with a sabotaged car. And then I found the ring. It wasn't near the car. I had walked a wider perimeter, moving toward the creek. Near a flat rock that jutted out into the water, I saw something glitter. I knelt to examine it. It was a ring, white gold with a small diamond, an engagement ring. It was sitting on the moss, perfectly placed, as if someone had set it there while they washed their hands in the stream. I looked at the water. It was gray and rushing, swollen with snowmelt. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around. The sound came from the dense tree line on the other side of the creek. I froze, straining my eyes against the gloom. The mist was thicker now, rolling down the valley like smoke. I saw movement, just a flash of color, a dull, earthy green blending with the firs. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded thin, pathetic against the roar of the water. "Nothing." But I felt it, the sensation of eyes on me, primal, heavy. I looked back at the ring. I didn't touch it. I had touched too much already. This wasn't an accident scene. This was a crime scene. I backed away from the river. I moved slowly at first, then faster. I passed the jeep, its blind, blanket-covered windows looking like closed eyelids. I grabbed a jagged handhold on the slope and began to climb. Panic is a cold fuel. It makes you move, but it makes you clumsy. I slipped, my chest slamming into the mud, the air rushing out of my lungs. I scrambled up, clawing at roots, dirt packing under my fingernails. I didn't look back. I expected to hear footsteps crunching in the shale behind me. I expected to feel a hand grab my ankle. I crested the top of the embankment and rolled onto the gravel of the road. I lay there for a second, staring at the gray sky, gasping for air. I got into my truck. I locked the doors. It was a senseless action. Glass breaks easily, but it made me feel better. I started the engine and drove. I drove fast, faster than I should have on those winding roads, the rear end of the truck sliding on the turns. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station near Glacier. I told them everything. The jeep, the clothes, the money, the cut wire. They launched a massive search. Ground teams, dogs, helicopters. They rappelled down the ravine. They sifted through the car. They found her passport, Lee Roberts, 23 years old, from North Carolina. They confirmed everything I saw, the blankets over the windows, the cat food, the cash. But they couldn't explain the wire, and they couldn't find Lee. They found footprints near the scene, but not human ones. Bear, cougar, but no boot prints leading away from that wreck. The investigators theorized. They said maybe she crashed and climbed out, disorientated, and wandered into the woods to die of exposure. They said maybe she staged her own disappearance. But they didn't see the ring by the river. By the time the search team got down there, the water had risen. The rock was submerged. The ring was gone, washed away into the Nooksack River. I never told them about the movement I saw across the creek. I questioned my own sanity. Was it a deer, a trick of the mist? But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Years passed. I kept working the woods, but I never went back to Canyon Creek Road, not alone. In 2006, they found her, or what was left of her. 2 hunters found artifacts in a remote area miles from the crash site. A backpack, clothes, and bone fragments. DNA confirmed it was Lee. They said animal predation had scattered the remains. They ruled it an accident or undetermined. But I still have nightmares about that jeep. In my dreams, I am back at the bottom of the ravine. I am looking through the gaps in the blankets stuffed in the windows, and inside, sitting in the driver's seat, is Leigh. She is looking at me. She is holding a finger to her lips. And behind her in the back seat, in the darkness where the cargo light doesn't reach, something else is moving. I think about the Into the Wild book lying on her dashboard. Christopher McCandless walked into the wild seeking truth and found death. Lee drove into the wild and found what? Did she meet someone out there, a fellow traveler, a drifter, someone who knew how to cut a starter wire? The woods are vast. They keep their secrets. They swallow metal and bone and turn them into rust and dust. I sometimes wonder if she was already dead when the car went over the edge, if the accelerator was pressed by a boot that wasn't hers. If the blankets were put up not to keep the world out, but to hide what was happening inside while the car sat on the side of the road, waiting for the push. I will never know. But I learned one thing that day, a lesson written in heavy mist and cold mud. The wilderness is indifferent to your dreams of self-discovery. It does not care about your journey. It does not care about your poetry. It only cares about hunger. And when you step off the map, when you drive down that lonely logging road chasing a ghost of an idea, you are entering a food chain where you are no longer at the top. I stick to the marked trails now. I check my engine before I leave the driveway, and when the fog rolls in, turning the trees into watching giants, I go inside and lock the door. Because I remember the cut wire, it was clean, it was precise, it was human. And whoever held the knife is still out there, somewhere in the endless green dark of the Pacific Northwest. The Dublin wind in December is a knife made of ice. It cuts through wool and tweed, finding the skin and sinking deep into the bone. I stood under the meager shelter of an awning on Haddington Road, the collar of my coat turned up against the gale that was whipping rain sideways across the street. The city was asleep, or mostly so. It was 4:00 a.m. The pubs had long since emptied, the Christmas revelers scattered to their beds or their hangovers. I was pulling a shift for a private security firm, watching the front entrance of an office building that had triggered a silent alarm. False alarm, as usual, a sensor glitch. But I wasn't watching the building anymore, I was watching the street. The CCTV footage I would see later, years later, in documentaries and news reports, would sear this night into the collective memory of Ireland. But at that moment, I was living it in real time, unaware that I was a spectator to a vanishing act. A young man walked past, tall, fair-haired, wearing a beige coat that looked soaked through. He walked with the heavy-footed cadence of someone who had been celebrating but was now just tired and cold. He had a prominent umbrella, a large ACC Bank 1, blue and yellow, but he wasn't using it. It hung from his hand, dragging slightly, a useless artifact in the face of the horizontal rain. This was Trevor Deely. I didn't know his name then. I just saw a guy walking home. He stopped at the gate of the Bank of Ireland Asset Management building on Wilton Terrace. I watched from across the street, partially obscured by the shadows of my own post. He fumbled for his pass, got inside. He was there for maybe an hour. When he came out, the rain had turned into a deluge. He walked back out onto the street. He had that same umbrella. He turned left, heading toward the Baggot Street Bridge. And that was when the hair on my arm stood up. This was before I saw him. It was a primal reaction, an animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. A man stepped out from behind a pillar near the entrance where Trevor had just been. This man was not like Trevor. He was dressed in black, entirely black, a hooded jacket, dark trousers. He moved differently. Where Trevor's walk was loose and open, this man moved with a coiled tension. He didn't just walk, he stalked. He waited until Trevor had gained about 20 yards, then he followed. I watched them, two figures in the storm, the prey oblivious, head down against the wind, the shadow deliberate, matching his pace. I should have called out, I should have crossed the street. Hey, watch your back. 5 words, that's all it would have cost me. But in Dublin at 4 a.m. you see things, you see drunks following friends, you see arguments, you see life happening in the margins. You don't intervene unless you see a weapon or a fist. I saw neither. Trevor reached the bridge, the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, creating pools of orange light that the rain shattered into a million fragments. He crossed the canal. The man in black followed. They were darker shapes against the dark water. I lost sight of them as they turned the corner onto Haddington Road, heading toward the residential area. The last image I had was of the beige coat disappearing past a wall, and the black shape slipping around the corner seconds later like a drop of ink in water. I went back to my post. The alarm was reset. I drank my coffee from a thermos. I finished my shift. I went home and slept. 3 days later, I saw the posters. Missing Trevor Deely, last seen December 8th. The face on the poster was smiling, full of life. It was the face of the man in the beige coat. I went to the guard. I told them what I saw. I sat in a room that smelled of damp wool and stale tobacco and watched the CCTV footage with them. There it was, the grainy black and white truth. The video showed Trevor arriving at his office gate, and there, waiting in the gloom, was the man in black. He was standing there before Trevor arrived, waiting. But the footage showed something else, something I hadn't seen from my vantage point across the street. Before Trevor went inside, he exchanged words with the man in black. It was brief. Trevor didn't seem alarmed. He gestured, maybe a polite refusal of a cigarette or some change, or maybe something else. Then Trevor went in. During the hour Trevor was inside, the man in black waited. He didn't leave. He paced. He stood by the gate. He was patient. When Trevor came out, the pursuit began. I watched the screen, feeling a cold knot of guilt tighten in my stomach. The camera caught them walking past the sensor light on Haddington Road. Trevor passes. 30 seconds later, 30 seconds, a lifetime in a chase. The man in black passes. He is walking briskly. He is closing the gap. Those 30 seconds are the last verifiable moments of Trevor Deely's existence. Where did they go? The theories are endless. He fell into the canal. He was hit by a car. He was mugged. But I know what I saw. I saw a hunt. You don't wait outside a building for an hour in a freezing storm for a random mugging. You don't follow someone with that kind of precision unless you have a destination in mind. I have walked that route 1,000 times in my head. I have walked it for real in the daylight, tracing the steps. Haddington Road is residential. There are houses, gardens, laneways. It's not a wilderness. How do two men walk down a street and only one comes back without a scream, without a struggle that wakes the neighbors? Unless the struggle was silent, or unless Trevor knew him. The brevity of that conversation at the gate haunts me. Was it recognition, or was it the first move in a game Trevor didn't know he was playing? Years rolled by, the posters faded, peeled by the rain and the sun. The canal was dredged, the gardens were dug up, nothing, no umbrella, no coat, no phone. But then a new lead, a named suspect, a known criminal in the Crumlin area, a story about a confrontation, a gun, a body buried in a woodland. The Gardaí searched a site in Chapelizod. They cleared acres of land. They found a gun, but they found no Trevor. I lay awake at night and I replay the tape in my mind. The man in black, his walk, he wasn't a drunk, he wasn't stumbling, he was military in his precision, shoulders hunched, head up, tracking. And the umbrella, why didn't Trevor use it? The rain was torrential. Why carry shelter in your hand and let the storm soak you to the skin? Was he distracted? Was he afraid? Or was he just so comfortable with the night that he didn't care? There's a phone box near where they vanished. Did Trevor try to make a call? His phone was active. He made a call to a friend earlier, leaving a voicemail saying he'd be home soon. Home soon, the saddest two words in the English language when they don't come true. Sometimes when I'm working a late shift and the rain is falling hard, I look at the shadows in the doorways. I see shapes that shouldn't be there, and I wonder if the man in black is still waiting. Is he still standing by gates, patient as a spider, watching for the ones who walk home alone? I think about the darkness of the canal water. It's deep and black and silent. It keeps its secrets well. But a body is a heavy thing to hide. A life is a hard thing to erase. Someone knows. The man in black has a face. He has a name. He has a life. He wakes up every morning, eats breakfast, maybe checks the weather. Does he think about the boy in the beige coat? Does he remember the sound of the rain that night? I do. I remember the sound of footsteps fading into the wind. I remember the feeling of being a witness to a ghost story before the ghost was even made. Trevor Deely didn't just disappear, he was taken. He was erased from the timeline of the city by a shadow that stepped out of the periphery and swallowed him whole. And the most terrifying part, the camera stopped recording. The lens of the world turned away just as the trap snapped shut. We fill in the blanks with our fears. We imagine the struggle, the fear, the final realization, but the silence is worse. The silence of the years, the silence of the empty street. I walk past the asset management building sometimes. The gate is still there, the pillar is still there. And if you stand there long enough in the cold rain of a December night, you can almost feel him standing next to you, waiting. Not for Trevor, for the next one. The cold in New Hampshire in February is a physical presence. It's not just a temperature, it's a weight that presses against the windows, seeking any crack to slip inside and leach the warmth from your bones. I live on Route 112, a stretch of blacktop that winds through the White Mountains like a scar. Locals call it the Wild Ammonoosuc Road, but to everyone else, it's just the darkness between towns. It was February 9th, 2004, a Monday night. The snowbanks were high, dirty walls of ice carved by the plows, narrowing the road into a luge run. I was in my living room, the wood stove popping, trying to ignore the draft creeping across the floorboards. Then came the sound. It wasn't the screech of brakes you hear in movies. On ice, tires don't screech, they hiss. It was a dull thud, heavy and final, followed by the crunch of snow and the distinct sound of a radiator hissing steam. I pulled on my boots and grabbed my coat. I grabbed a flashlight, not because I intended to be a hero, but because out here, accidents mean death if the cold gets to you before the ambulance does. I walked out to the end of my driveway. The scene was bathed in the red glow of taillights. A black Saturn sedan had failed to make the sharp turn near the weathered barn. It was nosed deep into a snowbank on the wrong side of the road, facing the way it had come. The front end was crumpled. I wasn't the first on the scene. A school bus had stopped. The driver, a large man named Butch, was standing by the window of the Saturn. I stayed back, watching from the edge of my property. I saw the driver's door open slightly, then close. I saw the glow of a cell phone screen inside the car, a tiny blue star in the red darkness. Butch walked back to his bus. He shouted something to me as he passed. She says she called AAA. I'm going to call the cops anyway, no service out here. He drove off, lumbering away to find a landline. I was alone with the wreck and the driver. I walked closer. The air smelled of antifreeze and cold pine. I shone my flashlight at the car. Inside was a young woman. She was pale, her dark hair hanging loose around a face that looked too young for the worry etched onto it. Maura, that was the name the news would scream for decades, but to me, she was just a scared girl in a broken car. "Are you okay?" I asked, my breath pluming in the air. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, glassy, dilated, maybe shock, maybe something else. She nodded, a jerky motion. "I'm fine," I called AAA. I knew that was a lie. There is no cell service in this valley. You couldn't call God from here, let alone a tow truck. "There's no signal," I said gently. "You should come inside, get warm, the police are coming." At the mention of the police, her demeanor changed. It was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of panic in those dark eyes. "No," she said, "no police, I'll wait." She turned away from me, rummaging in the backseat. I saw boxes, alcohol, wine coolers maybe, and a rag, a white rag. She got out of the car. She moved with a strange, frantic energy. She went to the trunk and tried to open it, but it was frozen or jammed. She went to the tailpipe. I watched, bewildered, as she shoved the white rag into the exhaust pipe. Why? To filter the smoke, to signal for help. It made no sense. It was the logic of a mind unraveling. "Miss," I said, taking a step forward. She spun around. "Please," she whispered, "just go." I hesitated. She was an adult. She wasn't blighting. I couldn't force her. And out here, you learn to mind your own business. "I'll be right at the house," I said, "if you change your mind." I turned and walked back up my driveway. I went inside. I watched from the window. I could see the red lights of her car reflecting off the snow. 7 minutes, not an hour, not 30 minutes, 7 minutes. That was the time between me entering my house and the blue lights of the police cruiser washing over my living room walls. I went back out. The officer was walking around the Saturn. The driver's door was open. The car was empty. "Where is she?" the officer asked me. "She was right there," I said, pointing. She was putting a rag in the tailpipe. We looked. The rag was there, choked with soot, but Maura was gone. We looked at the footprints. There were tracks around the car, chaotic, pacing. Then they stopped. They vanished on the dry pavement of the road. No tracks leading into the woods. No tracks leading down the road. It was as if she had dissolved. Or as if she had been picked up. Silence descended on the scene. The officer radioed it in. I stood there, feeling the cold seep into my coat. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the trees. It sounded like whispering. Where does a person go in 7 minutes in the middle of nowhere? She didn't run into the woods. The snow was deep, crusty. She would have left a trail a blind man could follow. She didn't walk past my house. I was watching. She didn't walk the other way. The bus driver would have seen her. She got into a car. It's the only answer that fits the geometry of the disappearance. But whose car? A random passerby, a good Samaritan turned monster, or was someone following her? I remembered the boxes in the car, the alcohol. She was running from something. You don't pack up your dorm room and drive into the mountains on a Monday night unless you are escaping. Maybe the thing she was running from caught up with her. The investigation was a circus. They searched the woods with dogs and helicopters. They drained ponds. They tore up floorboards and A-frames. They found nothing. No backpack, no phone, no body. Internet sleuths descended like vultures, picking apart every second of her life. They blamed the father. They blamed the boyfriend. They blamed the bus driver. They even blamed me. I stopped reading the forums. I stopped watching the news. But I didn't stop watching the road. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls down the valley and the snow is flying horizontal, I stand at my window. I look at the spot where the Saturn died. I think about those 7 minutes. I think about a car slowing down, a window rolling down, a voice offering a ride, offering safety, avoiding the police she was so afraid of. "Hop in, I'll get you to a phone." And she, cold and desperate and possibly tipsy, makes the choice. She opens the door, she gets in. And the log clicks. I wonder what that car looked like. I wonder if I have seen it since. I wonder if I waved to the driver at the general store, unaware that the hands gripping the steering wheel had dug a grave for a girl who just wanted to disappear. There have been sightings, of course. People see her in Canada, in Florida, in Vegas. We want to believe she walked away. We want to believe she is a master of disguise, living a new life, laughing at the search parties. But the woods don't feel like a place of escape. They feel like a vault. A few years ago, a searcher found an A-frame house near the crash site. Inside a closet, they found a knife and wood chips that tested positive for blood, but the DNA was degraded, inconclusive. The mystery remains a splinter in the mind of this town. It festers. But for me, it's not a mystery, it's a haunting. I see her face when I close my eyes. The pale skin, the dark eyes, the plea, no police. Why was she so afraid of the blue lights? Was it just a DUI charge she feared, or did she know something we didn't? Did she know that sometimes the most dangerous thing on a dark road isn't the ice, or the cold, or the trees? It's the help that arrives before the help. I live on the wild Ammonoosuc Road, and every time a car drives by slowly, I watch, I wait. I wonder if they are looking for lost girls, or if they are looking for a place to hide them. And I remember the rag in the tailpipe, a white flag of surrender raised before the battle even began. She tried to stop the car from running. She succeeded. But she couldn't stop the world from turning, and she couldn't stop the monster that was only 7 minutes away.